As we come to the end of Black History Month, I want to touch on two major stories. Both of these stories are, to put it mildly, thought-provoking. The first one, to me, is inspirational. But the second, well, let me say I have been battling with myself if I should share this one or not. But this is something that happened here. People committed this heinous act. And though we can and should forgive, we should never forget this victim. He went through this. It was a big deal. It cost him his life. And why should we bury our heads in the sand and forget that this happened here? I'm your host, LT Barteck. Welcome to Some Stories of Mine, where we take you along with us on our travels and bring you true stories. If this interests you, subscribe, give the videos a like, and comment to let me know what you think of these stories. First is the story of Mary Hardway Walker. Her life is a true testament that you can do anything you want at any stage of your life and at any age. Mary learned to read and write at the age of 116 years. Mary Walker was born in 1848. As a child growing up on a farm in Union Springs, Alabama, she could not understand why her family feared some of the people on the property. She saw they looked alike, with the same shaped heads, eyes, hands, and feet. They walked upright just like her. Yet her family talked in whispers when these people passed by, or were scooted out of the way when they saw them coming towards them. As time passed, she grew older and realized that they were called the white folks, and she and her family were the black folks. Then the realization hit her. She and her family were slaves, people who were taken from their homes to serve these people who looked like them but had a different shade of skin. Her people were forced to conform to their rules and to pick cotton and chop wood for the train tracks. She didn't object to life here, even when, as soon as she could walk, she was forced to take water to the men working outside. And as she got older, she worked with her mother cleaning the big house lived in by the white folks. Following the rules meant she could not get beaten, so she conformed. But one of the things she fought hard to understand was, why was she not allowed to read books, the Bible? Why were her people not allowed to read and write? Then she found out. It was so that people with her skin color would not gain knowledge. As they put it, they were not allowed to read for fear that they would become smarter than the white folks. She would watch as her kinfolks would be beaten severely when caught with a book or trying to learn to read, and that put the fear of God in her, so she stayed away from learning to read and write. Then came the Civil War in 1861, when Mary was 13 years old, and at 15 years old, they were freed men to do whatever they wanted. And now her family could leave this life behind if they wanted to. And they could learn to read and write if they wanted to. But life became harder for her and her kinfolk. Her father died, and they now had to find homes and food for themselves. Life was difficult. So she and her family stayed and continued to work on the plantation. Then the Freedom Bureau was established to help people like them find homes that the Confederates had abandoned. Mary and her family was given a one-room cabin. All she could do was survive there. There was no time for anything else. She worked 7 days a week with her mother to churn butter, clean houses, and babysit the white folks' children, all to feed her siblings. There was no time to learn anything other than how to do these chores, no time to learn to read. She sometimes worked 20 hours, sometimes even longer. There was no time to learn to read or do arithmetic, and life continued to pass. The need to know what these books offered was like a squirrel scratching in the attic, scratching inside her head. She struggled with being unable to read the street signs, knowing the names of buildings, and read packages. To add the price of things, she was disadvantaged. But life and its demands gave her no time. While working for the white folks, she didn't even have time to eat or go to the outhouse. Often she had to wait until she reached home to do so. All this for a quarter a week. One day, while Mary was heading to work, she saw a group of evangelists on the street preaching and teaching to the people around them. What they were saying drew Mary in, and she stopped for a while to listen. A lady walked over to her, looked her in the eyes, and placed a Bible in her hands. She never forgot what the lady said to her. "Your civil rights are in these pages," she said. Mary kept the book close to her, even though she could not read the words inside of it. Then that scratching started up again inside her head, saying she needed to know how to read. But that soon died again. She had no time. Mary met her husband, and by the time she was 20, she was married and had a child. They rented a house and worked as sharecroppers, but though they worked hard, all the money they made went into paying the rent and for the tools they used. Very little was left over for food. More time passed, then her husband died. The hard road ahead became even darker, but soon a light appeared when she met her second husband. Then more light brightened her life when she had her second and third son. Now needing even more money to feed her family, they left Alabama and moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where she was told that she and her family could make a decent living. So in 1917, at the age of 69 years old, she and her family arrived in Tennessee. She continued to work, but could no longer work long hours, for by the time she got home, she was too tired to do anything else but cook, eat, and sleep. Still, she had no time to learn to read and write. Her sons would take turns reading the Bible and the newspaper to her, all the way up to her 90th birthday. Then tragedy struck, and her life dimmed again when she lost her two younger sons, then her husband, and a few years later, her oldest son died at the age of 94. Mary was 114 years old and had outlived her entire family, and she missed them. With that loss, her life plunged into darkness, but it became even darker when she had no one left to read the Bible to her or keep her abreast of the happenings around her from the stories in the newspaper. That yearning to know what the squiggles on books, in newspaper, and on buildings came back with a vengeance. And in 1963, when she found out that the Chattanooga area literacy movement was offering through Miss Helen Kelly a chance to learn to read, write, and do math, she wasted no time in joining that class, even though she was now 116 years old. She went to a 1-hour class 2 nights a week. She struggled for almost 2 years to learn to read and write and do math, but she did it, and soon was able to read her Bible, where she remembered being told held her civil rights. She could now read signs, the paper, and anything else she could get her hands on. After her accomplishment, she was named the nation's oldest student and was given many gifts. Gifts such as a radio, a television, a new Bible, perfume, champagne, and most surprisingly of all, the key to the city. All of these meant a lot to her, but none was more than the ability to read, write, add, and subtract. The scratching inside her head had stopped, and she was complete. She knew why she was allowed to live for 121 years. She could not allow herself to die without learning one of the most basic skills, without knowing why that book held her civil rights and what the world around her was saying to her from buildings, signs, books, newspapers, and magazines. Mary died at her home at the senior citizens' apartment, a complete woman, surrounded by people who loved her, and a testament to everyone that you are never too old to learn. Here is the most heart-wrenching story of Ed Johnson and the monsters that came at night. Before I tell this story, let me say this. In past videos, I have done many stories that have been hard for me, but this one is the most heart-wrenching one yet. I can't see any other story that will rip me apart like this one. I had to keep reminding myself that this happened years ago, just to tell the story. I've also been trying to convince myself that we have evolved. We have gotten better. But then a recurring thought keeps popping up, and that thought is, have we really? I think we have found better ways to hide our monster-like behavior and have not come that far. I just pray I'm wrong. This story shows how brutal and evil a group of people can be, and it hurts me physically to tell this story, but I also feel I must. During the Civil War, with the Union Army occupying Chattanooga, former slaves were drawn to it as a place to be free and live in peace. After the war, other African American folks moved to Chattanooga, increasing the population to thousands. By 1900, the city's black population had grown, making up over a third of the city. But segregation raised its ugly head, and the blacks were not allowed to take the same public transportation as the whites. Rudolph Miller, one of the 119th prominent African American leaders, protested this unfair treatment, and horse and buggy taxis were put in place to transport the blacks to and from their location. With this unrest, the white newspaper posted inaccurate information stating that the crime plaguing the city was due to the black population and reported it as a black crime wave. This wedged an even wider distance between the citizens, and everyone was angry. On January 23, 1906, a woman named Nevada Taylor was walking home to her family cottage from the trolley stop one night. A man pounced on her, then took her to the Forest Hill Cemetery and raped her, in the very cemetery where her father worked. Meanwhile, far away from that location, a young man named Ed Johnson was working at the Last Chance Saloon. 10 people saw him working at the time of the attack on Nevada. But then a monster by the name of Will Hixon, knowing that Ed worked at the Thankful Memorial Episcopal Church and not seeing him working there for a while, decided to use him for his personal gain. He did not know that Ed had not worked at the church because the weather had gotten too cold for him to work outside, and that was the reason he had started to work at the saloon. This monster, Will Hixon, got Ed's name from his foreman and went to Sheriff's Ship and gave them Ed's name as a perpetrator just to get the reward money of $375, which would be about $10,000 today. Ed, as you can see, was a small-framed man who was quite unassuming, which I think was the reason why he was chosen. Wasting no time and ignoring all the witness statements and the fact that he was nowhere near the cemetery where the incident took place, for he was in the saloon at the time of the attack, they still arrested Ed Johnson. At the county jail, he was questioned by Sheriff Shipp, and Ed explained that he didn't do this. He could not. There was evidence to show it was impossible, but they needed a scapegoat, and they had a black one. Before long, everyone in town heard about the arrest, and the white folks became angry, not caring that this man was innocent. They became so violent that the sheriff had to move Ed to Nashville for his safety. That night, the mob came to the jail demanding that Ed be released to them for lynching, but when they found that he was not there, they dispersed. On February 6, 1906, Ed was brought back to the courthouse under armed guards. Nevada and the monster who gave his name for the reward testified against him. 2 people. One was the woman who was most scared and probably forced to lie, and the other was a man who wanted to keep his reward money. Against 10 eyewitnesses. 10 eyewitnesses went to the stand and told of Ed's innocence. Yet on February 8, 1906, the jury of white people found him guilty and sentenced him to death. One of Ed's final wishes was to attend church, but Sheriff Shipp denied that request, so the church came to him. Reverend W.B. Fleming and 300 members held the service outside his jail cell on the morning of March 18, 1906. Ed was baptized and listed as a church member, all the while imploring to everyone that he was innocent, but hurt that the law did not believe him, and he did not understand why. Later, with the law against him and seeing no way out, the reality of the time he was living in forced him into submission, and he told those who would listen that he was at peace and ready to die, and that he forgave all those who fought against him. His 2 lawyers appealed, taking it all the way to the Supreme Court, where they got a stay of execution, which was to give them enough time to have a fair trial because the one before was a travesty. On March 19, 1906, the newspaper reported the historic stay of execution issued by the Supreme Court and sent it to Sheriff Shipp via telegram the day before. The whites got crazy, holding a public meeting openly discussing lynching Ed. Nothing was done about this. Well, almost nothing. What the sheriff did was send home all the guards except one, knowing full well what was about to happen and doing nothing about it. That night, it took nothing to overpower the sole guard, and when a call was made to the sheriff to save face, he went to the jail and was promptly asked to go into the bathroom, where his kind usually went down the toilet. Soon over 100 monsters, breaking everything in the jail, took Ed. They marched him down Walnut Street to the county bridge, where he was hanged from the second span. Ed's last words were, "God bless you all, I'm innocent." Then 200 bullets riddled his small-framed body. The next day, on March 20th, 1906, thousands of black citizens participated in a stay-at-home protest. They did not go to work. Large group gathered to discuss the murder of Ed. The city leaders, fearing a race riot, ordered saloons to be closed. And now, after the innocent man's murder, the National Guard was brought in, and gun dealers were told not to sell guns to the blacks. I guess it was okay to sell them to the monsters who killed Ed. 2,000 mourners attended Ed's funeral, which was held in the Baptist churchyard. They celebrated his life, but not his death. Ed's community would not allow him to be buried in a pauper's plot as an unknown. Instead, Ed Johnson was laid to rest in the Pleasant Gardens Cemetery in Chattanooga. In the act of protest, the community paid for a plot and a large headstone that read, "Farewell, God bless you all. I'm an innocent man." Ed Johnson, born 1882, died March 1906. Blessed are the dead that die in the Lord. Ed was 24 years old. Nothing came of the arrest for Ed's murder. 19 people were arrested, plus Sheriff Schiff was called in for questioning and was also put into jail. But only 2 people went to jail for this. And Sheriff Schiff was released on good behavior in no time. The people celebrated his return. All this was such a travesty, and it makes me so angry that I can barely speak, but this is what happened here in Chattanooga in 1906. Okay, like I said, this was a hard one, and if my way of telling this story offended you, I just want to say in my defense that this was the best I could do. I hope Black History Month brought with it more insight and ways to make life better for all, and call to order ways to love everyone no matter the color of their skin. For we are all here for the same thing: to live, to love, to laugh. Like if you feel like giving this a like, and subscribe if you want. But love yourself and others, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.